For this project, I'm going to talk about college sports in the time of COVID-19. So, throughout the last 6 to 8 months, there's been a lot of change in sports as a whole, but especially college athletics. And you see that a lot now as the fall is starting to come back around after all the cancellations in the spring and summer. So I'm going to dive into a little more about how this is really affecting the student athletes as well as the administration. So first is the scenario of what's going on. So the coronavirus is obviously has had a widespread impact on sports. So the first to shut down was the NBA on March 11th of 2020. They completely shut down all games and activities related to the league, and there was no longer any games being played or practices being had by the NBA, and they were the first league to really shut down. And then from there, it was kind of a domino effect, and all the other sports and leagues began to cancel. Next, the NCAA basketball tournament was canceled, along with the rest of the season and all the spring sports shortly after. So all spring sports in the spring of 2020 were canceled. So there was no baseball and no softball or none of the other sports that you normally have in the spring and leading into the summer. This could have a lasting effect on eligibility rules and how many years the players be able to play going forward. The NCAA had decided to allow the players to have an extra year of eligibility no matter what. So if those players want to come back, they'll be allowed to. But many are going to have to make that decision in the coming months. And currently, even as we creep up on the start of the fall semester, and when the fall sports are supposed to begin, there's still no real plan for how the fall sports will get underway. So the first steps back that they're trying to start to make for college athletics was the players when they began to return to campus over the summer. So in June and early August, a lot of the student athletes were beginning to get back on campus and get back into voluntary workouts and things that a normal summer would look like. Obviously, they needed to have testing ready for the student athletes. And so a lot of the large Power 5 universities were able to test their players regularly because of the money that they can obviously generate from sports, but also tuition and different things. Also TV and advertisements through football and basketball and the big revenue sports that these universities have. But the smaller schools, maybe Division II, Division III schools, they were having to get away with just doing temperature checks for the student athletes. So that can lead to obviously many more issues with the temperature could fluctuate just from being outside, or maybe somebody's not running a temperature but is non-symptomatic and is testing positive for COVID-19, and that can lead to a lot of different issues that you normally wouldn't have to think about when returning to campus. So those are a couple of the first steps back that universities are trying to make, but there's still no real plan for moving forward as far as fall sports and moving into the next couple of years. So the first incident of there being punishment for positive tests for student athletes was at the University of Louisville. So what happened here, there were a group of 6 student athletes that all lived together in the same house, just off campus, but it's where mostly student athletes live. And as a result, there was a party, or what they said was just going to be a gathering of just a couple of friends who all were negative, and they were going to celebrate basically completing the summer workouts, all COVID free. So they were going to have some friends together, and it was going to be maybe a maximum of 10 people, which was well below the limit there in Kentucky. But of course, being in college, one thing led to another, and ended up getting much bigger, but only student athletes were there, and obviously all the student athletes had tested negative before, so they thought it wouldn't be that big of a deal. But after that weekend, they went to their trainer, one of the student athletes, and told the trainer, "Hey, I might have gotten exposed." And after that, everybody got tested again, and 29 players across 4 different teams ended up testing positive for COVID-19. And this is gonna, lead to a lot of ethical issues as far as, do the student athletes know that they might be passing on this virus, and also how is the administration gonna handle these student athletes contracting the virus? So obviously there was quick punishment with 3 players being suspended and 3 others being removed from the team altogether. And we'll get into that further here. So the ethical issues committed by the players are obviously the breaking of team rules, which I think were pretty loose in this scenario. I've talked to a couple players on the team, and they said, we're not supposed to have big gatherings, but it's difficult to say what a big gathering is when all these people and student athletes are all testing negative regularly. And then number 2, they were putting others at risk. So obviously this is a big one just in general for everyone across the country, is trying to stay at home and limit exposure by wearing masks and things to limit risk of everyone in the university, but also in the community. And then the third one is they were putting their personal desire of having a party or get together over the team, the athletic department, and the community's safety as a whole. So the ethical issues committed by the administration, did they really take the players' word on what happened? Because the players are claiming that, how are they going to know that these people would come uninvited? And then obviously there's an overreaction by this punishment. Who is to say that the players, that just because they hosted the party, they're any more liable for what happened than the player or the student athletes that attended the party? So it's difficult to say that they really deserve to get kicked off the team or even suspended just for people showing up to their house. And third is changing rules for different players. So, there's 3 players that obviously live there and were a part of the party that they get together, but were just suspended. But then there's 3 other players that were kicked off the team altogether. And it's difficult to say how you can really differentiate between the 2 different sets of players and punish 3 so severely as kicking them off the team, and punish a different set of 3 with just a suspension for a week. So those are a couple of the ethical issues that might have been committed by the administration by having such a haste and swift punishment for the players. So the administration's response, the athletic director, Vince Tyra, released this statement saying that the players were ignoring the safety protocols issued by federal, state, and local officials, as well as the athletic department. And that's unacceptable and dangerous. And he blamed the history of actions are not in alignment with the values of the university athletic department. And while there might be a history of actions, there's not really anything that is substantial enough to warrant kicking anyone off the team. So this is going to really bring up a lot of ethical issues as far as, is this really ethical to go to this extent of punishment just for, a player throwing a party when everyone involved was of age and there wasn't anyone that was known to be negative at the gathering. And the players also began to speak out about this, and this is the players' response to this situation. Is that, he said they didn't plan a party or a large gathering that night. They didn't really expect a large crowd to come over to the house. They asked one other student athlete who was also negative for COVID to come over and hang out. And that didn't violate any of the rules that were set out by the administration of the team. Obviously, several uninvited student athletes followed that player in. They said they were also COVID free, so they allowed them to come in. But then obviously things escalated very quickly. Athletes from multiple teams were let in by others that hadn't been invited. Obviously, many of them were unknown by the player, and this is where it gets out of hand, and the situation is difficult to control. So, obviously, these are some of the issues and the response that everyone has to this situation. But moving forward, what kind of precedent is this going to set um, for all athletics across the NCAA, and how will the administrations really be able to handle this? Because while you're asking players to be on campus during a global pandemic, how are you going to really enforce rules um, of them getting together? Because firstly, you don't want them to go off campus as much as possible. You want them to stay on campus, but then while they're on campus, they're still not allowed to gather. So that's where it's really restricting for 18 to 22-year olds to not even be able to get together with their friends or fellow student athletes. So in conclusion, I think that, as said before, the University of Louisville soccer team is going to be the first of many examples of how to go about punishment and non-punishment of positive tests in COVID-19. And as we sit here today, there have been three conferences have canceled their sports for the fall. The MAC being one of them, the Big 12 just recently, and then the Pac 12 shortly after that. And so it's going to be difficult to say. Obviously, many coaches and administrators are saying, is it really any more unsafe for athletes to play a sport that they love than to go attend a class? So it'll be interesting to see um, how the dominoes fall, and if these couple of conferences canceling sports in the fall lead to everyone, or if the SEC and the ACC might try and push forward in spite of the concerns of COVID-19.